Hey, round of applause for our awesome panel, please.
Hello.
Yay. Okay, so we're going to talk about imagining the future. What does VR tech look like 10 years from now? It doesn't have to be 10 years from now. It can be 5 years from now. And we're not just going to constrain it for virtual reality. We're also going to talk about AR and mixed reality as well. So because this is the last panel of the day, I'm going to start with a fun question. So, fun question. And please, I would like to hear from all of you guys, whoever wants to go first. What is the most exciting potential application for VR that you can imagine in the future?
What full stop, as in all types of VR, the potential thing?
Potential.
I'm just going to go geeky about it because I'm really interested in the tool set for VR. So for me, what I think is really interesting is the idea of creating 3D things in the VR space, just because creating 3D objects in a normal modeling package, or, like Modo or Maya or so on, is a very technical thing, really hard to do, really difficult, and it's quite a disconnect to have a flat screen over there and then be able having to create things in a 3D world, yet you're not in a 3D world. And I think creating something in 3D in VR makes a lot more sense. So an example I've seen before, I don't know if you've seen it, is the Dear Angelica demo from Oculus Story, where I think it's Quill. They were using Quill to create 3D animation. And the illustrator that did that, she was a completely flat illustrator. She drew everything, had never done anything in 3D. And to teach someone to do something in 3D takes quite a few weeks and technical know-how to even start to even model something simple. And she was able to go from drawing something onto a flat paper to some object is 3D in a beautiful manner, in a matter of hours. And I think that's an amazing thing that's going to completely transform the way that you can visualize and create things in 3D. So I think that's really exciting.
I'll bring up two. One, super pedestrian, but I actually think that just storytelling in VR and storytelling in three-dimensional spaces, I think, is going to become a really big thing, and I don't think we've anywhere close to figured that out yet. But I think that's going to be a really big area. And then the second area is medical imaging, actually. So most of the medical images that we look at today, fundamentally volumetric. Almost everything that we're trying to learn is something about the volume of the body, and we just have 2D imaging today. And I think if I think 5 years out, 10 years out, it's almost certain that most of those experiences will be sort of VR experiences.
The thing that I think is so interesting about VR is we were just talking about how we're almost at 10 years since the iPhone came out, and I think if you go back to what were we all thinking in 2008, you could guess at a lot of what the most interesting things would be. It's like, oh, you got a computer, it has the internet, sensors, it's in your pocket. But there were a lot of really surprising things that have, like, oh my God, transportation's changing because I just get a car whenever I want really easily. A lot of things were many of the things I'm most excited about were not intuitive in day zero. And I think we're day zero with VR right now, and it's this completely new human-computer interface that new applications will come out of that we can't predict today, and those will be really exciting.
Yeah, I sort of second that. I think one of the great things about VR is that we don't have to obey the rules of current media or current three-dimensional spaces. So what I'm excited to see is how all the great creatives out there are going to actually stretch what we think of as a world that we can interact with. We don't have to obey normal spatial and temporal rules. We don't have to be the size that we are. There are so many amazing fantasy capabilities that you could build out of freeing people from the rules of this normal world. And I think one of the challenges right now with VR is everybody's trying to do what we've done in the past. And what I'm excited about is how this evolves as an art form. And I think that it's not even worth trying to predict, because there's a whole new generation of storytellers and creative people that are basically going to bend all the rules. And I guarantee when we look back in 10 years, the world as we perceive it and how it connects between, how we connect between the virtual world and this world is going to be totally different from anything we've ever experienced today.
And the thing that I'm so excited about with this group is, like, if you look over the last couple of years of creating VR content, like just making something that kind of works is so painfully difficult that like that's an accomplishment in and of itself. But I look up here and it's a bunch of people working really hard to make it so, like make tools that make it so much easier to create VR experiences. And once that burden gets lessened and people can just experiment and figure out like what is storytelling in this new medium, I can't wait to see what we find.
Agree.
Yeah, and so on that note, I'm going to ask you guys, and maybe team from Lytro can start. It's a little bit of the chicken and an egg question, but do you guys think that the content will advance the hardware, and therefore the hardware is going to advance the software tools, or is it the software going to advance the hardware, and therefore the content creation?
That's a great question. I mean, and I would actually split that into two pieces. I think there's the headset side and how the hardware and the software on the headset side continues to evolve. And then there's also the capture side, where how the hardware and the software on the capture side continues to evolve. I honestly think that the way this will probably go is that headset hardware and the adoption of 6 degrees of freedom hardware and positional tracking across all headsets and wider fields of view and those kind of things are going to drive pretty different choices that content creators have to make. At Lytro, we obviously bet on that with light field technology. We build light field capture devices and light field capture processing solutions and software solutions. And we're betting that as that positional tracking becomes ubiquitous in the headsets and in headset software, that will have to become ubiquitous in capture. So I'm a firm believer that 5 years from now, you won't ever watch a high production value piece of VR content that isn't 6 degrees of freedom, light field capture based. That's my belief. I believe there'll always be a place for documentary content that'll probably continue to be 360 video for practical reasons. But as we go forward and we produce a lot more high-end content, I believe that that's going to push. And so my bet is that positional tracking will drive a lot of content creation, and then that will ultimately drive a lot of how we do the content capture in the first place.
Jake?
I think everything has to kind of happen in parallel, and there's this like hopeful, virtuous cycle where like the only reason anyone's going to buy VR or use VR is because there's amazing experiences. Like that is the foundation that's driving everything that everyone's doing on hardware and tooling and everything. But it's only worth their while if there's great content that brings people. So it's just a lot of things kind of all trying to creep up at once. And you know, on our side, you know, one of the biggest ways we're trying to push it is like, how do we bring more VR to more people sooner? And so you have things like Daydream that brings the whole high-end Android ecosystem into a place where we'll all of a sudden have like good quality 3DoF tracking on millions and millions of devices. We need that audience in order for everything else that we're doing to be worthwhile, so that we can get to this future that I believe in too, where we'll have, you know, great positionally tracked headsets and great 6DoF content, but it's a journey to get there.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree that ultimately it's going to be the killer app, the killer experience that actually drives a lot of what happens there.
You know, I've always felt that creative and technical go hand in hand. The greatest innovations always have wonderful artists working with amazing technologists. And at Epic Games, we're lucky enough to not just be an engine company. We make games, we make VR experiences, we do cinematics. And most of the things that drive us are about being more creative and making new content. So almost all of our ideas in terms of new tools that we add, like our VR editing capabilities, where you can design a world in VR, came from the fact that we actually, we build experiences and we see the designers struggling, not being able to understand a three-dimensional space. So we go, okay, let's add to the tools so the artists that are making our content actually can have a better context and be more efficient and make something more amazing. And then, from our gameplay perspectives, we think about what would be a cool moment. Wouldn't it be great to be able to, take a robot and be able to, throw it around and play with it or whatever, and we'll add abilities in the engine to enable these things. So I don't think these two things are separable. I think it's imperative that creative and technology are all done as one sort of cycle together. And without that, I don't think you see innovation. I think, one of the challenges with the film business is we've got very much into this service base. There's the content creators at the studios, and they're basically working with a third party, visual effect company, whatever. And I actually think that during these innovative, formative years, it's much better to be closer to the people making the content and the technology.
John?
I would agree with that as well. I think, they both go hand in hand, and part of the reason that we want to go towards I believe in light field capture as well, and light field displays and light field playback as well, because you want that degrees of freedom. But part of that is part of the creative decision of a person experience the other type of experience where they have full degrees of freedom, and then the audience feeding back to us to say, well, I wish I could have this in live capture as well. So it's kind of a circle of feedback that goes on to drive back into the hardware innovation. So yeah, I feel like they're kind of linked in the same kind of way.
And Jake, you actually touched on it just now a little bit. So what technical challenges do you guys think remain to be solved before the holy grail of high immersion and high realism and widespread availability can happen?
All those things?
Yes.
I think with the immersion piece, when you come into live action capture, then it's got to be able to break free and be able to have some degrees of freedom, that a light field capture device would do, or volumetric capture, which is also quite interesting as well. But all these things lead to challenges basically to do with data rates, which become enormous, and not just enormous when you're capturing and processing it, but enormous if you want to deliver it live to the device and be able to have it kind of composite down to a stereo view, if you're still going to have it on a flat display, or even delivering light field directly to the device is expensive too. So I think we're going to need more storage. We're going to need faster, internet. I think another thing for wide adoption is we need to lose the tether. This is incredibly important going forward. It's obvious, right? But
I'll definitely second that. Just data rates and how much data we're going to be collecting, it's already true with 360 stereo cameras. It's more true when you get to light field scale. Those things, solving the data rate problems both to the device as well as from capture, are going to be really critical. The other thing that I think is going to become really essential is that in all of this, VR is fundamentally a 3D medium and a 3D space where you want to move around. And I think that what we're going to start seeing is a lot of our tools need to stop thinking in terms of a 2D image that you do some tricks to, in terms of thinking about a multi-camera system that's capturing a 3D world that you need to do a bunch of stuff to. And I think that's going to be a pretty fundamental shift in terms of how we think about what images represent and what they are over the next 10 years.
So I'm gonna disagree a bit in that, I think all of this technology, every step you get closer to emulating reality obviously makes immersion and presence and everything easier. But I think we're already at a point where really great productions, you forget where you are and you're completely lost in that moment. I remember the first time that I watched Felix and Paul's Jurassic World Apatosaurus on Gear VR, and this dinosaur is looking me in the eye. I completely forgot that I was wearing a headset, and that I didn't have side-to-side parallax from moving my head, and was just lost in the moment. So I think that I think people are already really great productions are able to build those really immersive moments already, and I think that we'll see more and more of it the easier the tools get. I think one of the things that's interesting for us, so we've been on this 18-month journey of building and shipping this automatically stitched stereo 360 camera, and we're great, it's easier to shoot, it's easier to capture stereo 360 video, and everyone's yeah, it's easier to capture stereo 360 video. It's still really, really hard to create these, to tell a story and to craft something that someone gets lost in. And so as important as the capture side is, the tools to everything after capture is so important. And I'm looking to you two guys to really solve that, because at the end of the day, these I think directing this story, creating a narrative is that's what gets people lost, not just this hyper technical fidelity. I can move my head.
No, I agree. I think we have to be honest as well. Is although there are many amazing ways to capture some component of reality and get it into a virtual reality experience, virtual reality is super immersive. It is the greatest experience, in my opinion, is when you can interact and have a part to play in that world. I think stories have to be crafted differently to deal with your understanding that you're present there. And definitely there's ways to, you're a ghost or there's a reason these people aren't looking at you. But I think that there's a hybrid space between what we do in the video game space and what we do in complex photographic capture such as light field capture or 360 capture. But we have to acknowledge that once people get used to, you go here and go and play some of the experiences, once you actually can pick something up and interact with that world in VR, and Daydream's taken us that way, and our friends at Oculus and on the Vive system as well, are beginning to define the rules of how you interact with the world. Once you've done that, it's very, very hard to go back. You expect a world that you can actually manipulate and have some outcome in. So when we think about all these clever capture techniques, we have to work out how do we integrate them into a world that the user can actually change. They can change their point of view. They can move around.
Yeah, and that's the biggest challenge, isn't it? We can't, well, in this day and age, we can't really easily create a 3D representation of this room just by, flicking our fingers and then we can do it. So how are we going to build these things that we can interact with easily? I think what's really interesting is this, going forward is, people like Google and others are building a 3D model of the entire world, aren't you? Like people driving around in essentially self-driving cars with LiDARs beaming out everywhere, people having phones with depth, connectors on them to be able to kind of scan rooms. So I kind of do feel like the world itself may be available as a 3D model in some fashion that you could use, but the hard part is the performances and how do you affect a captured performance and be able to manipulate that so the character can interact in some way with you.
And in that sense, I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg right now, where now you have the agency to turn your head around. In the future, you'll have the agency to move around, and then eventually agency is being able to actually affect what the world is doing.
Yeah, we're in this, 360 video is really hard in this way, where you come from a world where you can direct and control someone's attention, and you just give them just enough interactivity that they can look wherever they want, without giving people creating this experiences the tools, call interactivity or whatever, to bring the experience back to them and to respond to where people are looking. And so as much potential as there is in 360 video, I also firmly believe it'll keep going farther because we need to give those tools back to tell stories.
Yeah, and I guess that's just human nature, right? Because we keep talking about the killer app and the killer this, but I feel like there will be a killer app for a little bit, but we're humans and we always want more, right? Faster, better.
And the killer app is so hard to predict. It's almost impossible. I was thinking about the beginnings of the internet when I was thinking about this panel. I thought, I remember when the internet started and I had to dial up on a modem, and then I opened Netscape browser, and then I went to Hotbot to do my search. Do you remember all of these things? And then some people had AOL walled garden, and you couldn't go outside of all this stuff. So that all was there at the start of the internet. Does anyone use any of that now?
No.
Or who would have thought at the beginning of the year that I'm guessing the most profitable AR or VR thing would be, Pokemon on a phone.
Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
which
You
speaking
can't
of,
predict
that
these
takes
things.
me to the next question. And speaking of some challenges, we've heard a lot about VR today, but now what do you guys think? Could be briefly about the challenges for mixed reality and augmented reality today, but the challenges that you see happening in the future. Could be 5 years, can be 10 years from now.
I mean, the obvious problem today is display, right? Everybody knows that. So that's today. But then I think, how you get then the content that you want to actually display and how we interact with that, not from a user standpoint, but from a development standpoint, how do we actually decide what things to put in the environment at what times, I think is going to be a very interesting paradigm shift in terms of how we think about how users bring stuff into the world and how you deal with that as a developer as well.
I think one of the challenges on the AR side is how does a creative or an artist author for one of these unknown spaces in an AR experience? So all the ones I've seen so far are I go into an unknown space, kind of recognizes a wall, I put something on the wall, and then that's placed there. But you don't want that to happen, I think, in an AR experience that's some sort of story that's going to play out in your house, for instance. You want it somehow, the AI to detect that there's a table there and act appropriately. But then from the artist's perspective, how do they author for that? I think that's quite challenging. It's very similar to gaming, but I think it's kind of on another level.
I think AR from a realism point is point of view, it's very, very hard. You know, we go to so much effort. You know, I spent 20 years in the movie business doing visual effects, and the amount of effort we go to be able to match the lighting and get something to integrate into the world, and for you really to believe that that augmented reality is an augmented reality, there is tons and tons of problems that we don't know how to solve right now. And I actually think that the greatest technological component to making AR work is the fact that there's going to be masses of people experiencing the same stuff, or other people are looking at this building. There's data that by cross-correlating what people are seeing and what they're doing, you should be able to solve these problems. But it's pretty hard, and I think that the concept of your AR is running in some little cell phone strapped to a little display device, I don't really think is the way it's going to be. I think this is a hybrid challenge between remote cloud-based computing, massive machine learning systems, and data sharing between every single person in that virtual world.
Jake, any thoughts?
AR is really hard.
Yeah.
It's so interesting though, because it's like, you know, we're starting to get this experience of, you know, through VR of being able to go anywhere. You know, VR takes you somewhere else, and it's really alluring to be able to bring anything in the world to you through AR. I think they'll eventually happen. They'll eventually, you know, merge and be very. But AR is so hard and so far away.
I mean, I think part of the challenge is just how freeform the spaces that you will have to interact with. Like, you could be anywhere, you could be in any environment. And so building an experience to that is going to be, I think, really challenging for us to figure out even after the tech stack.
But I think we'll have some really interesting surprises. And again, going back to Pokemon Go as like a super high fidelity, super pure version of AR. There's this idea of being able to layer something new on top of the real world. Long before we can do it perfectly, long before we can semantically understand the world, long before we have like a perfect 3D representation of it, people are going to build really cool things.
Yeah. And I think just remembering that, you know, always think of things from the consumer's point of view. They want to be awed and entertained. So actually, sometimes very simple things can be amazing. Pokemon Go is a really simple game, and it happens to be attached to an IP that people really, you know, really fits what you're trying to do in that game. So sometimes maybe we shouldn't overthink things technically.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, the next year is going to be quite telling, really, in VR, because finally the headsets are going to get out there in a bigger way. More people are going to experience it, and then they're actually going to feed back to us what they like or don't like, rather than us sort of theoretically. We're all officially enthusiasts, aren't we? So we might have a different slant on it than the general public.
Yeah, I think on that side of things, people really like things they've never experienced before. So if you allow to give them a game mechanic that they could have never done with the traditional medium, people are thrilled and excited. So I think, as I say, don't try and shoehorn old ideas into this new medium. Try and think of what best fits this new medium.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest mistake that I've seen over and over again in VR, is to say, like, I'm going to take this existing thing and add VR to it, whereas all the most powerful experiences are these like native, from the ground up, taking advantage of this new experience.
And our best experiences, you know, Robo Recall, it's a tiny team at Epic. It's our smallest team by a long way, and their success is because we don't interfere with them. We don't tell them what they should be building. We're like, guys, make something cool. Make it so that you're all giggling and find it fun, and I'm pretty sure the rest of the world will love it. And that's the way the thing's gone down, and it is. It's an awesome experience. It's pretty simple. Didn't take that long. Very small team. But yeah, it's not about trying to force people into building this thing that you have a vision for. Let the team that's actually building the content help evolve it to be the thing that you put in front of consumers.
So speaking about evolving, so I'm all about light fields and videogrammetry and volumetric capture and all that. However, we're not there yet at the present time, right? So what is this question is about the present time. How well does today technology handle the ever-evolving vision for virtual reality? Like, where is the technology today?
I think that our obsession with absolute photorealism is misplaced. I think in the interactive medium of VR, now you've got the touch controllers and the controllers with the Vive, it's so amazing what you can do. Don't be constrained about that. Make stuff that is just fun, and don't overthink it.
One of the interesting things we've seen on the mobile VR side is because we have so much less compute, than you would on the plugged-in VR side, and people haven't had the option of chasing photorealism. That constraint has like people have gone in really interesting, powerful, wonderful directions that they never would have thought of.
Yeah, constraints are a good thing.
Yeah, and I definitely think caricature on the CG side, I think, will be the norm for quite some time in VR because there are constraints on the compute side. You can't spend 100 hours rendering a frame. You get a couple of milliseconds to render a frame. So I think there's going to be this bifurcation for a little while of sort of caricature on the CG side and then sort of much more emphasis on live action instead of sort of heavily CG and live action mixed content for a little while on the live action side, is my guess.
John, any thoughts?
No, I think I agree with you guys on all those points.
Yeah, so I was going to say on those terms, so I've heard today a lot of people saying that it's going to be amazing when there's high-end, big-budget visual effects movies done in VR. My personal opinion, I was just thinking what it would be like to watch something like Guardians of the Galaxy 3D inside of the headset. And me personally, right now, I don't think I could do that. Do you guys think that entertainment, like the big budgets visual effects films that we see today, really is the way to go, or do you feel that there's a lot more, and not obviously games is a big one, so beyond games and beyond like entertainment?
No, I mean, I think there's still can be a lot of money spent on a VR experience for sure. That's not a gaming experience and can have some level of agency without being a full immersive game where you have to interact to make any of the story kind of continue on. But I don't think we should ever think of just taking a movie and then converting it into a VR thing, because that's just a completely different way of looking at things. You know, movie, it's absolutely up on a screen, you're completely separated from it, whereas VR, as we all know, it's all around you and you're immersed in it. So it's got to be thought of in a different way. And we've all talked about this all day today, is that nobody knows the exact answer to this, and everybody's learning as they go along. And as we go along, we'll develop more and more language for it. As more people see VR experiences, they'll feed that back, and these things will get better. But I don't think it will be convert a blockbuster movie into a VR.
And we've seen this over and over again with every time we've had like new technology for entertainment. Like the first film was recording theater. The first TV was like a radio show, but visual. Yeah. And we're totally still at that stage when it comes to like live action VR. Or like the closest thing that we know is either coming from games or coming from film. And like, how do we put that into VR? And I think when we look 5 or 10 years back, the things that we really love are going to be completely different and completely native.
And you don't even know until you try it as well, do you? Because you think, okay, well, this idea looks like an interesting idea. Let's try it out, and you do it, and then you experience it, and then you're like, well, actually, that wasn't so good.
And that's
Let's try another thing.
And that's what's been so hard about, I think, the last couple of years, is it's so expensive and so hard to do anything. Yeah. You can't experiment, you can't take risks, you can't explore the medium. And I think now that we're starting to get tools like game engine content, automatically stitched video, all this stuff starts to take out so much of the time, cost, and complexity that you can experiment and learn. And only now are we going to start seeing the first really interesting native VR experiences.
Okay, we were all children at one point, and I think big IPs, if you think about it, when you go to a movie and you watch an awesome movie, when I was a kid, Star Wars or Superman or whatever, you come out with a feeling like, wouldn't I love to be, Luke Skywalker and go through the lightsaber training and learn to use the Force? Take them emotions that you get out of watching a big IP, as opposed to the actual, exactly playing back what happened, and let people partake in them fantasies. Yeah, that's the best way to use a big IP, as opposed to trying to shoehorn exactly what happened. Make the child happy in terms of them being able to, pilot a X-Wing or whatever cool thing that you take away from watching the movies. But don't literally try and translate the scenes into the experience that people are going to see as a story.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think we're going to see, I think we all know that we're going to see a variation from fully immersive interactive experiences to probably much more passive experiences and probably everything in between, and I don't know how that's going to shake out yet. I don't think any of us have any idea whether long-form content or short-form content or medium-form content is going to be the thing. I know some content creators that are trying to create 40-minute VR pieces now. I don't know if that's going to end up being what we all end up thinking about, or whether it's the 3-minute, 5-minute pieces that we have today. What I do think is true is that as VR gets more traction and as there are more devices out there and as there are more users out there, we will see the production quality and the production value definitely rise. And so the part of the $50 million, $150 million VR film or film in VR experience that I think is true is that I think we'll start to see budgets that sort of approach those levels of feature films in terms of permanent content and so on.
Jake, I saw you there like you wanted to say something. No? Done? No?
I've already made a comment.
That's it? Okay. So we don't have that much time left. We have 2 minutes left. So I had 4 more questions, but maybe, is anyone in the audience, do you guys want to, I can open up to questions since 2 minutes, not that. Well, actually, before I open up the questions, one last thing that actually is not in my previous questions, but I'd just like to know, please give us briefly a prediction of what the technology or some technology that you'd like to see 10 years from now that would be the most exciting thing for you personally. Kim, take it away.
I don't want to be wearing a sweaty headset.
I'm right there with you. That gives us pink eye. Jake?
I don't want to have to fly to meetings anymore.
Mine's closely related. Room scale live action 6-stop volumes.
I like the idea. I don't want to fly to meetings anymore. That sounds really good.
Okay, amazing. I still have 1 more minute. Woohoo, right on time. So anyone in the audience that wants to ask something for our awesome panel, please?
Yeah, they said they were building a cinematic. Thank you. I'm really loud without this anyway. Camera, but I was curious about the IMAX thing. Is there going to be a place, almost like an arcade, attached to exhibitors where people are going to sit with headsets on?
What we talked to the IMAX guys quite a bit at Lytro. What we know about that is that there will be like when you go to an IMAX theater, you'll pay $10 for the movie, and you can pay $5 or something for some add-on experience about the movie. So you go to see, I don't know, the latest Pixar film, you go to see Finding Dory, and then you'll go to a high-end VR experience right next door in the IMAX theater for some extra charge. And so I think, especially early on, when we are so compute constrained on a lot of devices, and I think there is going to be a lot of these in-venue experiences where you'll experience high-end VR content in some specific venue with some specific machine built to a spec.
And like, you know, you look at Vive and Oculus, and they're really expensive and out of the reach of most people. And you know, whether VR theater, VR arcade, whatever you want to call it, I think there'll be a real demand for. I want to go have a incredible VR experience better than I could afford to have at home.
Yeah, but I think IMAX's intention is definitely to like leverage existing IP and like bring that brand experience and sort of monetize the superfan.
And not to mention the hardware is expensive. It's incredibly hard to set up right now, and I think that will become easier. But
And it's all different. Wouldn't it be great if we actually had some standards for the hardware so that everything was a bit more interchangeable? I don't like using other people's headsets. I would like to have my own that I could just take with me to events.
actually, you know, the other thing we haven't talked about in this panel is the whole social thing. I don't know. You want to talk
Yeah,
about that?
let's talk about that.
Because I feel like everything we've seen so far is it's very singular and everybody's in a single headset. or whatever.
That was one of my questions.
Oh,
so-
was it? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. So,
Sorry, I'm
yes,
taking
good.
over.
Yeah,
Shit.
take over, take over.
Um,
We run out of time, but I think because we're the last ones, we can keep going for like 5 more minutes. Can we? Huh? Yeah?
Yeah.
Huh? Thumbs up. Okay. So yeah, it was actually, well, it was that most of what we heard is one of the criticisms for VR is just how anti-social it is. So how are we going to bring it? But more in the future, we just saw at Oculus Connect what Facebook is doing. How are we just going to socialize?
Yeah, because
this?
I mean, I'm really interested in like the idea of having virtual meetings and being able to, say hello to your kids when you're on a holiday or add recordings of that. That's all going to definitely come, and social interaction via this medium. But what about storytelling with multiple participants and stuff like that? I mean, I know that's been done in games for a long time, but is there a passive version of this that can exist? Is it multiple people sitting in a theater while they experience VR, or avatars in the experience together? I don't know. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think it's one of those things that if it gets figured out, 10 or 100x is everything, because the isolating element of VR today is one of its biggest weaknesses. And so I think the early experimentation we've seen with social from Facebook and others suggests that even in very low fidelity ways, we can get a huge amount of social value out of those things. So I don't know the exact answer, but I'm hopeful and optimistic that based on what we've seen, there will be some co-experiencing of things in VR.
It feels like even just watching any one of the experiences I've seen today that's a non-interactive one, that just if I had the person sitting next to me in that experience while I was watching it would be enough to make it not feel isolating, even though you're in a completely isolated room and the couch isn't there and all that sort of stuff. At least if that person was there, we could enjoy it together rather than being separate.
You think about it, we can pretty much do, with not considering the visual fidelity challenges, but we can show the most unbelievable stuff in VR. Creating amazing spectacles that you can have multiple people experience at the same time and see some presence of their friends or the crowd that's there. I think this is not hard technology. We have multiplayer game technology right now. I think people just need to start thinking about, let's do what's the equivalent of going to the Pink Floyd concert with all your friends and seeing amazing spectacle that could not normally happen on planet Earth.
Yeah.
Come on, people, have some amazing ideas.
True. Well, I guess we really run out of time. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, guys, on the panel.